Okay, so good morning. It's good to be back. I'm sorry that I was away, but went to a niece's bat mitzvah in Israel. Happy to be back now, learning together with you live. Looking forward to continuing. We are now in the fourth parak of Basra. We're on the Daf Samach Daled, 64. We are at the Mishnah on Daf Samach Daled. But let's back up and just remind ourselves what we're dealing with. This is Parak HaMocher Es Habayis, where a person is selling a house. And the question is what comes with the house? Now, on some level, this isn't as relevant for us today because it's a little clearer when one sells a house today what's included. But if one thinks about especially a sale of an apartment, then a lot of the questions become relevant again. Because when you are purchasing an apartment, what are you purchasing? Indeed, in New York, there are two forms of apartment home structure, where one is a co-op, where effectively the entire uh, 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 apartment building is owned jointly by all of the residents, and then they just have separate agreements that each of them owns, has the rights to their apartment. Whereas when you have a condominium, then you own literally everything within the walls of your apartment, rather than specifically any particular rather than just shares in a corporation. And so some of the questions that we'll be discussing can be viewed as relevant to that, because when you buy an apartment, do you get a parking space? Do you get what rights do you have to water? If there's and so some of those kinds of questions can come up in that context. So let's take a look. In this particular instance, we're going to have a question of water rights that are associated with the sale of a home, and let's take a look. So again, we're on the Mishnah Samach Daled Amud Aleph 64a, and we'll pick up from there. So Loes Habor v'Loes Hadus. So when you purchase a house, it does not include either the bore, a cistern. We saw previously, and we're going to see it specifically in this Gemara, that the Rashbam explained that a bore is where you just dig into the floor, but you don't actually, create any stone structure associated with the pit. Veloas hadus, and not with a cistern, where the cistern is going to have a stone structure to it, so that you not only dig it out, but you also support the walls, so to speak. So those are two kinds of water holding aspects. And the point is that although they're very useful for a house to have, they don't necessarily get included in the sale. Afal pishik kasavlo umka veruma. And remarkably, even if I were to write that I'm selling you my home to the entire depths and to the entire heights, that does not mean that I'm selling you the pit that is, or cistern that is inside the home, that is there to collect water. That essentially I am retaining that. And the Rashbam does a nice job of explaining. Afal, first Rashi, second of the wide lines at the bottom of the Rashbam. Even though you wrote to the depths and to the heights, as we saw Rav Dimi explain in the Gemara earlier, that you don't ordinarily get the depths and the height. Meaning, if you buy a living space, you are buying literally the four walls and what's inside it, nothing more. No rights to air rights, no above, no rights to dig beneath. That's it. Va'ahani umka varuma, lemikne umka varuma. And when you then write that you are getting the depths and the height, that is what gives you the rights to dig and the rights to build up. The low lemikne bor v'dus, but that doesn't give you the rights to the pit and the cistern. Shitashmishan chaluk min habayis, because the usage of those items, the pit and the cistern, those are separate from the house. She'enu asli l'sha'ov mayim mimenu l'sha'ov mimenu mayim, because those are only built in order to take water out of it. They are not in order to live there. So this highlights two things that we are going to be seeing, that we have seen and we are going to continue to see in this parak. And they are the following. First is that whether or not something can get included relates to its importance. On some level, the more important the item is, the more likely it's not included, right? Because if it's more important, then I want to sell it to you separately.
Bigger money.
Right, bigger money, exactly. The second is how similar is the usage. So, and the more similar the usage, so then the more likely it will be included. And the more different the usage, the less likely it will be included. And those are two different dimensions under which we are going to need to analyze everything. And the commentaries focus on them separately and will highlight different aspects of them depending on their particular point of view. But here, the Rashbam is saying that it's the usage that's different. Okay. V'tzorach likach lo derech. But the seller, in order to be able to use that cistern or pit, needs to purchase a right of way from the buyer. Meaning, if I sell my home to you, and in the middle of the home is a pit and cistern, and I did not sell to Stan the pit or the cistern, but I want to use it and now take water out of it in order to be able to draw my bath, because I now live next door. So I need to buy a right to enter Stan's property. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. The Chachamim say no. He does not. I do not need, as the seller, to purchase a right, because when I retain the cistern and the pit, I also retain the right to access it. And we will see over the course of the Gemara today that this is effectively a debate about whether we say that a seller sells ba'ayin yafa or ba'ayin ra. Does he sell with an open hand or a closed hand? Literally, a good eye or a bad eye. The point is do I, when I sell something, am I inclusive or exclusive? That's the question. The Chachamim say that no, I'm going to sell as little as possible. And the Rabbi Akiva says, no, you're going to be generous. You're going to be selling as much as is reasonable, meaning that we're going to view things on some level from the buyer's perspective. He wants the whole thing. He's going to get the whole thing. Whereas the Chachamim say, no, we're going to view it from the seller's perspective. And if he wants to retain something, we're going to allow him to retain. Umoda Rabbi Akiva.
Well, we spent a good deal of time last week talking about Hezek Riyah and Lo Hezek Riyah. Now, if the seller wants to retain this, isn't there an aspect of privacy? How can he walk in at 3 a.m, say, I want the water from that I didn't sell you from the pit in the middle of your house?
Yeah, but that's an excellent question. And so according to the Chachamim, because he has retained the right, it's just like a shared courtyard. And in a shared courtyard, I can go into that shared courtyard anytime I want. I have the property right. Remember that the hezek re'iyah is on exclusive property. The point is that if you have exclusive rights, or if you and a group of people have exclusive rights to a space that I do not have access to, then we will have the concept of hezek re'iyah. We don't have the concept of hezek re'iyah if we share an apartment. If you and I both share a courtyard, for example, if both you and I have our shutafim, our partners in a courtyard, there is no hezek re'iyah in that context. And so as a result, if in fact we are going to say that according to the Chachamim, that when I sell you my house, I retain my pit, well, my retention of the pit and a way to get the pit means that we are effectively partners, and it is expected that I will be there, and it expected that you will need to watch out for my invasion of your privacy, and therefore, no, you do not have any kind of, we don't have the concept of hezek re'iyah in that context. Okay, so
So he
umod
has to
Rabbi
provide him a
Akiva,
key to the door then, basically,
of course, absolutely. According to the Chachamim, you need to provide a key to the door, and I have full rights to access that the pit according to the whatever route that you allow me to take. Umoda Rabbi Akiva, bisman she'amar lo chutz me'elu, that if, in fact, when I sell you my house, well, now again, I'm going to go back to selling it to Stan. If I sell Stan my house and I say explicitly that I'm not selling the pit or the cistern, well, then even Rabbi Akiva would agree that I am retaining a path to that pit or cistern, because I don't need to say that I'm excluding the pit or the cistern, because we know that a pit and a cistern are for different purposes and therefore are not included in the sale. So why did I specifically include language to exclude them? I included language to exclude them in order to keep for myself a path. In that situation, I don't need to buy a path to those locations because I've clearly intended to retain it. What about the following? Now, machron la'acher. Now, instead of selling the house, or maybe in addition to selling the house to Stan, I have sold to Ken the pit and the cistern. So if I sell this pit and the cistern to Ken, and we'll take a look at Rashbam. Rashbam makes clear what it is that we're selling. Machran libor vidus, right? I'm selling the pit or the cistern, la'acher, to a third party. V'habayis ikiv la'atzmo, and according to the Rashbam, in order to resolve another difficulty, he's saying that I am retaining for myself the rest of the house. Rabbi Akiva Omer, eino tzarech likach lo derech. The buyer does not have to purchase a right of way, meaning when I sell the pit or the cistern, included in that is the right to access the pit and the cistern. No, he does need to acquire a right of way. Those are separate things. There's the right to access it and the right to, and the usage rights. I can sell you one without the other. For example, let's say you live next door and happen to already border the pit or the cistern. So then you don't need the access rights. So the point is that we can sell those two things separately.
So
by the way,
selling them to? Who's he selling? Well, he's selling the pit to a third party.
Yes, I'm selling, again, you'll be the pit / cistern buyer. I am retaining my home. In the middle of my home is a wonderful way to access clean, wonderful water, and that is my pit and cistern. And so we'll say we'll keep with the cistern because those are likely to have cleaner water, because the walls are stone. And so you are like, David, you have beautiful water. And I'm like, oh, Ken, I'm happy to sell you my water rights here. You can buy this pit that I have, this cistern that I have. And you say, fabulous, I'm now buying it. And I say, okay, terrific, it's now yours. And then you come and say, well, now I want to access it. And that's the debate between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, of course, when I sold you the cistern, I sold you the right to access it. And according to the Chachamim, I'm like, no, I did not sell you. I only sold you the rights to the water that's inside it. You own the cistern. You don't own any access of land to the cistern. It's not implied. It's not, there's nothing. So you need to buy that from me separately. And so effectively, I may be able to charge you twice for it. But of course, if you know that ahead of time, you'll know to condition your purchase on the access of access rights. But of course, the point is that if in fact you happen to live right next door and you have a window overlooking my cistern, well, then you don't even need the access rights. So you'll be able to say, I'm going to access it through my window that I have that looks right into your the space where your cistern is located. So that is the debate between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. And again, it's a question of, do we say that the seller sells with a full hand and in a kind manner, in a generous manner? That's what Rabbi Akiva says. And the Chachamim is saying, no, he sells only what he says he's selling and nothing more. And I will note that for our benefit that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva, that a seller sells with a generous hand. Okay, so Yosef Ravina, the Kakashilai. So Ravina sat and asked the following question. Hainu bor, hainu dus. So I said to you already the difference between the two, but we have here, what is the difference between a bor and a dus? And the Rashbam helps us here by explaining what exactly is the question. Hainu bor, hainu dus. First Rashbam on the Gemara. It's 1, 2, 3, 7 lines up. Ezehu, beginning of the line. Ezehu bor ve'ezehu dus. What's the difference? What constitutes a bor and what constitutes a dus? V'halo ein heker bein zelazeh. But because really, at the end of the day, there's no difference between the two of them. Shishneim amukim bekarka. The both of them have depth in the ground. V'yesh behen mayim mukansin. And they gather water. Uvilamali lemisne tarti. Why do I need to even bother teaching both? So that's what the Gemara is effectively asking. So Amrle Rava Tosfa LeRavina. So Rava Tosfa said to Ravina, Tashma Detanya, we got a brisa. Echad habor ve'echad adus bekarka. Both a bor and a dus are in the ground. Ela shahabor bechafira. A bor is just dug. V'adus bevinyan. And a dus has some kind of stone structure. So that's the difference. And we have another conversation that this also happened with Rav Ashi. Yosef Rav Ashi v'kakashile, hainu bor, hainu dus, Amrle Mark Shisha, Braid Rav Chista, Rav Ashi, Tashma, Detanya, Echad bor, ve'echad adus, v'karka, Ella Hashabor b'chafira v'hadus bevinyan. So same basic idea. And Rashbam now helps us because, again, wouldn't we say that shouldn't we only need to teach one of these and we'll know the other? So the Rashbam explains why, in fact, we need both of them. So bebinyan. So let's take a look at the last Rashbam, 5 lines up on the bottom of the page. Chofrin bor ba'afar. So, we'll do the one before it also. So he explains clearly what chafira and binyan are. Bechafira bekarka, meaning you dig in the ground. Kashet, in hard ground. Shemakzik mayim below binyan, that will now hold the water without any structure to it. So if you have very packed earth, then you'll be okay, and that you don't need the binyan structure. But binyan, chofrin bor ba'afar, you dig again a pit into dirt. Tichuach, that's looser. Ubonin lo kotel avonim, and you now put a stone wall, umikri dus, and that gets called a dus. The hilkach, and now therefore, itana bor. If we had only learned about a bor that's dug, havamina, I would have thought hanimili bor, that only a bor that is dug, shehu bechafira, that only a bor would not be included in the sale of a house. Aval dus, shehu bebinyan. Whereas a cistern that has a stone structure to it, ke'ein habayis, that is just like the house which has a stone structure, harei hu beklal bayis, maybe it should get included. V'itana dus, and if we had learned about the dus, mishum debinyan bifnei atzmohu, that's because it's a separate structure, v'chashiv, and it's important. Aval bor But when it comes to a bore that is only dug and has no stone structure, maybe it's so unimportant that it would be constituted, that it would constitute essentially nullified towards the house. Lo chashiv. It's not important. V'lebatel, and it should be nullified, gabi bias, and nullified negative relative to the house. And so it's so unimportant that maybe it would be included. So tzricha. And again, this highlights that there are two aspects to our discussion: the relative importance of the item and its usage / structure. Is it structured like a house, or is it not structured like a house? Is it used like a house or not used like a house? And on the other hand, is it important or is it unimportant? So those are the factors that go into determining whether or not something's included. V'tzarach likach lo derech divrei Rabbi Akiva, and the seller needs to purchase back a right of way. So that's what Rabbi Akiva says. And the Chachamim say you don't need, as we're now at the 2 dots on the last line of Samach Dalet Amud Aleph. My lav b'hakamivli. It must be that this is what they're arguing about. As we turn to Samach Dalet Amud Bet, the Rabbi Akiva savar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, the Rabbanan savar mocher ba'ayin ra mocher. That Rabbi Akiva says that you sell with a good eye, meaning that you sell everything that's included, and the rabbis say that no, you don't. You sell only what you mention and nothing extra. Udika amar nami ba'alma. And then where we say everywhere else in the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva l'taimei de amar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, that Rabbi Akiva is like his reasoning here, is like his reasoning that he sells with an ayin yafa mahacha. It all comes from here. Okay, so now that we've offered that as a possibility. Now we're going to reject it, but in the end, we will come to the conclusion that, in fact, this is what Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis are debating about. We just won't necessarily prove it from here. So, mimai.
No,
So
Rabbi Akiva says everything is sold in the house, let's say. He doesn't even need to discuss then whether one has to pay for access to the pit. It's already included, right?
No. The point is remember, the seller is retaining the pit. And
but
so
the Rabbi Akiva sells it by Yafa. He's selling the pit too. He's selling everything.
No. Everybody agrees the pit is not included in the sale. Everybody agrees. Very important. Thank you for helping to clarify. It's very important to note. Everybody agrees that the pit is not included. Rabbi Akiva, the rabbis, everybody, because the pit is a separate structure. It is not a living structure. It is appended to a living structure, but it is not itself a living structure. And therefore, it is not included in the house. Now that we know that it's not included, the question is, does the seller retain a path to that pit? And the answer, according to Rabbi Akiva, is no, because when the person sells the rest of the house, he sells with an ayin yafa, and so he has retained nothing for himself left in the house, and he does not have any right to go to the pit through the house that he has sold. Okay, so now the Gemara is asking me, how do I know that in fact this debate is about whether or not we sell with an ayin yafa? As Rashbam puts it, Dilma dekuli alma hasam ayin yafa mocher. Maybe in general everybody agrees that we sell with a generous eye, generous hand. The yesh lo karka. I'm sorry. The Gimel takes us to the yesh lo bikarka, and so as a result, a second. Maybe everybody really agrees that you would sell with an ayin yafa, and you would not, and you would at the same time you would get to keep the land, or inami ba'ayin ra ve'ein lo, or maybe people would all say that you don't sell with an ayin yafa, you sell with a bad eye, but you don't get to keep the land. And that's what they're arguing about. Meaning, maybe the argument is not about the generosity of the particular set of sellers and buyers in general, But rather the argument is about a specific case, this specific case, and you cannot generalize. That's what the Rashbam is explaining, that's what we're asking. And now we're going to explain. Dilma, Rabbi Akiva Savar, back into the Gemara. We are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down near the end of the line. Dilma, Rabbi Akiva Savar, Ein Adam Rotza Sheyitain Ma'usav V'Yidrisuhu Acherim, that when you buy something, you don't want other people walking through it. This in some ways touches on Ken's point about the privacy rights and hezek re'iyah, that when you buy something, you don't want other people to walk through it, and so therefore, even though you would ordinarily, Rabbi Akiva would ordinarily say that you don't sell with an ayin yafeh. In this particular instance, the buyer isn't going to want to pay to have others walk through it. So as a result, we're going to say that the seller doesn't get the right of way. For Rabbanan Savrei, and the rabbis think, Ein Adam Rotza Sheyitol Mos V'Yifrach Ba'avir, that a person doesn't want to take money and then have to fly through the air. Meaning, why should I have to fly through the air in order to access the pit that I retained for myself? Of course, I'm going to retain some property that's around it. So essentially, what we're saying is we can't generalize from this situation. Maybe this situation is so specific that in particular, there's such a strong argument in each direction. And Rabbi Akiva emphasizes the argument that the buyer has, and the rabbis emphasize that the argument that the seller has. So Elam Seifa, 1 second, but maybe we can say that even if you want to say that really in the connection with the first part of our Mishnah about my sale of the house and retention of the pit/cistern, maybe we can't prove that Rabbi Akiva says that ba'ayin yafa mocher and the rabbis say ba'ayin ra mocher, but because we have these great arguments, but why would you need to tell me the arguments twice? Because listen to the end of our Mishnah. Elam Seifa, machran la'acher, Rabbi Akiva omer eino tzarech likach lo derech, v'chamim omer tzarech. If I sell just the cistern, when I sold the cistern just to Ken, Rabbi Akiva says I don't need to sell a path to the cistern because it's included. And the Chachamim say, no, the buyer, Ken, does need to buy it if he wants to have access to it. So doesn't it show that it has to be that Rabbi Akiva says that ba'ayin yafa mocher, and the rabbis say ba'ayin ra mocher? Because after all, it can't be that we're just teaching the same point twice. And indeed, it's not even the same point, because it's the exact opposite, because in the first case, Rabbi Akiva has clearly said we are worried that, a person doesn't want to pay money and have others walk through it. And so yet here we have somebody, the buyer is the one who paid the money, and now I'm going to end up letting you walk through my property. I don't want to have effectively bought my house from you and let you walk through my property. People don't want people walking through their property. That's the whole point that Rabbi Akiva was making. And according to the Chachamim, they seem to be reversing their idea, because the Chachamim said that people don't want to have to fly, and yet now he's saying that the purchaser needs to buy the right so that they don't have to fly. But again, we say that people don't want to have to fly. So the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva seem to be reversing their point of view. So doesn't it show that really what's going on here is all about whether or not we sell liberally or not? No, not necessarily. Dilma b'hai pligi, maybe this is what they're arguing about. Rabbi Akiva savar basar daita de lokeach hazlinan, for Rabbanan savri basar daita de mocher hazlinan. No, the question is whose assumptions are we going to take as given? And the answer is Rabbi Akiva will say, we'll follow the buyer, and the rabbis will say, no, we're going to follow the seller. And so that's how we're going to do it. So as a result, maybe in this instance, because of the importance of these two concepts, of how important it is to not have somebody walk through your property and how important it is to have access to something that you've retained, that Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis are going to say, are going to have this debate. But maybe in general, they will all agree either ba'ayin yafa mocher or ba'ayin ra mocher. But it's only because of the importance of the claims of being able to not want others to walk through your property, and the claims of being able to not have to fly in order to get to your property. In those two claims are so important that's why they argue in this case. But in general, they might not. The elameha. All right.
So with Rabbi Akiva, he says, "Ba'ayin yafa," that means what? That the seller
always sells as much as possible. But remember, right now,
then he would have to pay for the rights to walk through the property, right?
That's correct. That's correct. But again, we are in the middle of the Gemara. The Gemara originally says that, can we say from our Mishnah that that Rabbi Akiva says ba'ayin yafa mocher, and the rabbis say no, ba'ayin ra mocher, and we have concluded at this moment that maybe the argument isn't that strong, that it isn't that extreme, that right now the argument is only about the case of a pit in a house, that only in that case, because the seller has the argument, but I don't want to have to fly to my pit, and the buyer has the argument, I don't want a third party walking through my property, that in that situation, that's where we'll have the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. But maybe in general, if I just sell you some, piece of property where there is no question about a pit that's being retained, maybe in that situation, we won't say, there won't be a debate between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis about ayin yafa or ayin ra. Maybe it's only because of the power of these two particular arguments, the power of the argument that I don't want some third party walking through my property, and the power of the argument that I don't want to have to fly to access my pit. Okay. But
they're talking about two different aspects. One is talking about the first case where the buyer sells the house but not the pit, and the other is talking about the case where the buyer sells the pit but not the house.
No. There's a debate in both cases.
Right. There's a debate in both cases, but we're trying to take an argument.
And right now,
the buyer in one, and the buyer in one of the cases,
correct,
and the seller in the other one.
Correct. And right now, what we've said is the following: according to Rabbi Akiva, because of the strength of these two arguments, we're going to always follow the buyer's desires. And according to the rabbis, and because of the strength of these two arguments, we are always going to follow the seller's desires. However, when it comes to the general principle of ayin yafa mocher or ayin ra mocher, that is not necessarily an element of the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. And where we're going to go right now is we're going to now cite the Mishnah on ayin aleph amud aleph, and we're going to say, hey, can we use that Mishnah to show that actually the argument is about ayin yafa mocher and ayin ra mocher, meaning that the argument is not narrowed to only this case of the sale of a home without a pit, or the sale of a pit without a home. Maybe it's a broader machlokas of ayin ra, yafa and ayin ra. So so we're going to look at this Mishnah. What about the following? Lo as a bor, lo as a gas, lo as a shovech. That if you sell a field without specifying what's included in it, you don't sell the pit, you don't sell the wine press, and you don't sell the dovecote. Bein charavin, bein yeshuvin, whether or not the people are using those assets. The tzorech likach lo derech, and the seller needs to buy a right of way to get access to them. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's what Rabbi Akiva says, because again, they're not included. Okay. But you have sold everything so much that you need to buy a right to it, because again, Rabbi Akiva is going to say ayin yafa mocher. The Chachamim omrim eino tzarich. The Chachamim say no. When you retain the dovecote, the winepress, and the pit, you also retain a way to get to them. So ha tu lamali. Why do I need to also have this debate? Doesn't it show that this debate is really about ayin yafa mocher v'ayin ra mocher? That the rabbis say ayin ra mocher, and the Rabbi Akiva says ayin yafa mocher. Mocher b'ayin yafa. Elolav hakamash malan. Doesn't it show the following? The Rabbi Akiva savar mocher b'ayin yafa mocher, and Rabbanan savar mocher b'ayin ra mocher. Again, exactly as we had thought initially. So can't we show that this is the core source to this debate, and that Rabbi Akiva really says that we sell liberally, and the rabbis say that we sell stingily? No. The Dilma Ashma'in bias. Maybe we're teaching, maybe the first Mishnah, our Mishnah, taught about a house, the Kamash Malan Sada, and now we're telling that the same principle applies to a field. Utsricha, and I need to learn about both a field and a house. The Ashma'in bias, because if I had only taught about the house, Mishum debites Niyusa. In a house, people need privacy. Aval soda emelo, but maybe in a field, people don't need privacy, and therefore people won't be concerned about other people walking through.
That's
but
what I'm talking about
end,
before. Hezekiah, he needs some privacy.
Yes, exactly that. But again, the privacy aspect is not about the Hezekiah. It's about the idea of, am I buying? Is this something that I'm buying my own? Am I buying my privacy, or am I not buying my privacy? That's
Right,
the
but
question.
there is some aspect of Hezekiah. I mean, I understand you. There's a distinction, but I'm just bringing that as a concept of privacy. That
yes,
someone shouldn't be able
absolutely.
to walk in and see what I'm going to the bathroom, whatever it is.
100%, 100%. Mishum divai, okay. V'iyashmin and sada. And if I had just taught about a field, right? So then mishum de kashila davsha. That's because in a field, if I have other people walking on my field, so that's going to ruin the field. Aval bias amalo. But people walking in my home, that doesn't ruin my home, because my home is walked in all the time. And so as a result, that's not going to ruin any field. And so maybe we wouldn't have the same debate. And so the bottom line is we need to learn both of them. Elam is Seifa. Oh, well, 1 second. Well, what about the Seifa over there on Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph? That in the end of that Mishnah, Machron La'acher, where you sell the pit, the wine press, or the dovecote to a third party. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, Eino Tzarach Likach Lo Derech. Rabbi Akiva says that the buyer of the dovecote, the pit, or the wine press, they don't need to buy a right of way to access them. The Chachamim Omer Tzarach, and the Chachamim say you do need. So Hatu Lamali, why do I need the reverse case? Hainu Hach. It's the same thing as this, once you tell me that a field and a house are equivalent, so then I would learn it if this is all about that same principle. Elalav, hakamash malan. In the end, that's exactly right. This is what is coming to teach us. The Rabbi Akiva saver mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, the Rabbanan savre mocher ba'ayin ra mocher. That in fact, we can learn if we focus not just on our Mishnah alone, but if we focus on our Mishnah in conjunction with the Mishnah on Ayin Aleph. So then we will now see that the Rabbi Akiva will say that when a seller sells generously, and the rabbis say no, a seller sells not generously, and that is what the debate is all about. So Shema Mina, in fact, that is a good lesson. So Itmar. So let's continue, and we'll just get to where the conclusion is. Although it's interesting because from this alone, it's hard to tell that we actually paskin like Rabbi Akiva. Itmar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, halacha kedivrei chachamim. That it's the halacha is like the chachamim, meaning that caveat emptor, the buyer beware. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Akiva. So essentially, it's a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel as to who we paskin like, and the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva according to Shmuel. Now, I will note that usually we say that the machlokas Rav and Shmuel halacha Kishmuel bedine and Rav beisurin, I believe, and so as a result, that would also support our statement here that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. But okay, so Amrle Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Rav Huna. Rav Yirmiyah said to Rav Huna, V'hazimnin sagian amrita kamei derav. But 1 second, there were times that I said in front of Rav, Hilchasa ka Rabbi Akiva, that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. V'lo amrli v'lo midi. And Rav didn't say anything to me. So if you're telling me that he says that the halacha is like the Chachamim, how could that be? So Amrle Hechi Tanita. 1 second, what exactly did you say? Because maybe the circumstances of how you said it will explain why Rav would not have objected. So Amrle Ibcha Tanina. I taught it reversed. Now, Rashbam here helps us because why would if Rav Yirmiyah taught it reversed, meaning that he taught that Rabbi Akiva says ba'ayin ra'a mocher, whereas Rabbi and the Rabbanan say ba'ayin yafa mocher, wouldn't it be obvious to Rabbi Yirmiyah that in fact that's why Rav did not object, because he was reversing the opinions? And what Rav was saying is, yes, the halacha is like the opinion of Ayin Ra Mocher. So the Rashbam explains, Amar le Ibcha le Rabbi Akiva ba'ayin Ra u'Rabbanan ba'ayin Yafa u'Gemarahu de Kamefarish de Ibcha Hava Tani. And it was the Gemara that is using an abbreviation that is saying that he taught it in the opposite direction. So the opposite direction, again, is that Rabbi Akiva was saying ba'ayin Ra, and the rabbis were saying ba'ayin Yafa. But the Ibcha Havitani Rabbi Yirmiyah, Umihu Ihu Lo Amar. But he did not himself say that he was teaching it the opposite. Le Rav Huna, he didn't say that to Rav Huna, Lashon Zeh, with this language, Ibcha. Tanina, She'im Haya Yodeya, She'ain Rav Huna Shona Kamoso. Because if he knew that Rav Huna was teaching it in the opposite direction from what he was saying, Lo Haya Lo L'Tmua, he wouldn't have a question. But the point is that the Gemara is reporting, again, the Gemara is reporting that Rav Huna was saying in the name of Rav that the halacha is like the Chachamim, without saying what it was that the Chachamim said. And Rabbi Yirmiyah was saying in the name of Shmuel the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, without saying what Rabbi Akiva said. And what we are learning when Rav Huna said, when Rabbi Yirmiyah was reporting that he said in front of Rav that the halacha was like Rabbi Akiva, what he said was that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, meaning that he really said the halacha is ba'ayin Ra Mocher. And as a result, the Rav didn't object. But Rabbi Yirmiyah thought that was Rabbi Akiva's viewpoint, when in fact it wasn't. Dahainu hach de bein l'Rav Huna bein l'Rav Yirmiyah hilchasa de ba'ayin Ra Mocher, because really what they were both saying is ba'ayin Ra Mocher. Okay, so Mishum Haki, and so then Rav Huna responds, Mishum Haki lo Amar Lach lo Midi. That's why Rav didn't say anything to you, because you were effectively agreeing with him, because you were effectively saying that the halacha is ba'ayin Ra Mocher. And so as a result, the Rav had no need to argue with you. All right, so we're going to pick up.
Rav then hold that it was Ayin Yafa, or do we not know how Rav held it?
No. So Rav clearly held ba'ayin Ra Mocher, and Shmuel definitely holds ba'ayin Yafa Mocher. And Rav Yirmiyah was confused because he thought that the opinions were reversed, and so as a result, Rav Yirmiyah thought that that Rav and Shmuel had reversed their opinions, but in fact, Rav was the one who says ba'ayin Ra Mocher, and Shmuel says ba'ayin Yafa Mocher. And so as a result, that's where we're going to pause for today, and we'll pick up, God willing, from Amar Ravina, God willing, tomorrow. And we're going to now, again, we have this disagreement as to whether or not Rav and Shmuel argue, and we're going to ask now the question, is this argument between Rav and Shmuel about Ayin Yafa and Ayin Ra, do we say that this also explains another debate that they have? And we're going to see with the answer to that and what that debate is all about, God willing.
So we say that Rabbi Yirmiyah holds like Rav, that he thinks that Rav holds Yayin Ra'a. Is that it? And then, but what does Shmuel hold? Does Shmuel still hold like Rabbi Akiva? That Rabbi
Yes.
Akiva...
Yes. In the end, only Rav Yirmiyah was confused. Everybody else was correct. And Rav Yirmiyah said the actual correct thing in the name of Shmuel, but he thought that Rav also agreed to it because he had the opinions reversed. But in fact, Rav holds Ayin Ra Mocher, Shmuel holds like the rabbis, and Shmuel holds Ayin Yafa Mocher like Rabbi Akiva.
But that's not the rabbis. Shmuel is like Rabbi Akiva.
That's what I just said.
Wait a second, but
Rav holds like the rabbis and saying Ayin Ra Mocher, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Akiva and saying Ayin Yafa Mocher.
Like Rabbi Akiva. So
it's
right. So what was Rabbi Yirmiyah's confusion then?
Rabbi Yirmiyah's confusion was that he thought Rabbi Akiva was the one who said Ba'ayin Ra Mocher. And when he said Rabbi Akiva, what he thought was Rabbi Akiva's viewpoint in front of Rav, no one objected. So as a result, he thought that Rav and Shmuel both thought Ayin Ra Mocher. But of course, it turned out that he had his viewpoints wrong. The point is that in front of Rav, Rabbi Yirmiyah gave the viewpoint of Ayin Ra Mocher, and Rav did not object because Rav agreed with the rabbis. But Rabbi Yirmiyah thought that was Rabbi Akiva's viewpoint. So now when he heard from Shmuel that the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva, he thought that Shmuel was also saying that Ayin Ra Mocher. But no, Shmuel knew that in fact Rabbi Akiva said Ba'ayin Yafa Mocher. And so as a result, there was a debate between Shmuel and Rav. Shmuel says Ba'ayin Yafa Mocher like Rabbi Akiva, and Rav says no, Ba'ayin Ra Mocher like the rabbis.
So he was thinking that Rabbi Akiva, said Shmuel also, that Shmuel thought that Rabbi Akiva also said Ayin Ra. Is that
correct? That's what Rabbi Yirmiyah thought. But Rabbi Yirmiyah never heard the words Ayin Ra Mocher from Shmuel. Rather, he just heard from Shmuel that the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva. And when he heard from Rav, or when he reported in front of Rav that the halakha is Ba'ayin Ra Mocher, Rav didn't object. So as a result, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba thought that both Rav and Shmuel held the same thing, namely Ba'ayin Ra Mocher, and that was the viewpoint of Rabbi Akiva. But he was wrong because he had their viewpoints reversed. And so we've explained how it came to be. He thought that Rav and Shmuel were really saying the same thing. When Rav said Ba'ayin Ra Mocher, and Shmuel said the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva. But in fact, they were saying two different things because they disagree. Rav says the halakha is like the Rabbanan, and Shmuel says the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva. And the rabbis say, the Rabbanan say, Ba'ayin Ra Mocher, and the Rabbi Akiva says Ba'ayin Yafa Mocher.
And he thought that Shmuel thought or said that Rabbi Akiva,
the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva. Shmuel said the halakha is like Rabbi Akiva.
But he thought
Rabbi Yirmiyah thought that Rabbi Akiva said Ba'ayin Ra. But he was wrong.
Right.
So that's what Rava ended up explaining to Rav Huna ended up explaining to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Okay, so we'll pick up from there, and we'll see now again another debate between Rav and Shmuel that may touch on this question of Ayin Yafa and Ayin Ra. Have a wonderful day. God willing, tomorrow I'll be back to having the document on the screen. Just was catching up and just didn't have a chance to prepare it for today. God willing, back to it tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.